Hello and welcome. I'm Christopher Witt, and I serve as the Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the University of Denver. And I'm very pleased that we have so many people from across the university engaging with us today for this webinar. Obviously, we're coming together under motivation of a situation that is not a pleasant situation, but it's certainly we can't allow history to happen before us without engaging in conversation, without really talking about the weight and the gravity of situations and really thinking about our spheres of influence and how we navigate spaces and we can hopefully navigate spaces and influence to make a better world for the future. I want to thank C plus V and all the work that they do throughout each year on focusing on increasing the sense of belonging on this campus and really opening up spaces like this for conversation. I want to thank my colleagues across the division of DEI, where we end up engaging in this work and engaging alongside C plus B and so many other areas in really building our community and really thinking of our structures as we move forward, as we can be a better DU. I want to thank Student Affairs and Inclusive Excellence and DU's Human Resources and Inclusive Community divisions for all the work that they do on a regular basis, as well as the support in pulling this together today. I also want to thank Academic Affairs, thank the Chancellor's Office, and thank so many other entities across the university, as well as individuals who continue to be supportive in this work as we move forward together, hopefully, as a university. Also, on this call today, I want to thank our colleagues, Kristen, Tremaine, and Thomas, who are working in the background to make sure that those of us on screen are able to keep our thoughts at least somewhat organized as we engage in this, this tough and weighty conversation. I would like everybody to know that if you want to engage and participate, the way that we'll do it today for this webinar will be by using the Q&A function in your Zoom, and that will basically be an influx for us. That's where information will come in, and we will do our very best to include as much of the information that comes into that space into our discussion in the later half of our hour that we're sharing today. Once again, thank you all for engaging. And I just want to give a little bit of context beyond what we've already talked about for today. So we're near the end of the school year. And, we have to remember that we are in a very American context. And what I mean by that in being in an American context is that we have a history that is littered with moments of domestic terrorism. And we have a history that is littered with ways in which white supremacy has been at the core of much of that domestic terrorism, but we also have basically a foundation in the United States that's a foundation of exclusion. And really we can witness in looking at American history, the evolution of white supremacy as it's woven into so many different elements of our structures, be it our higher ed space, be it government structures, be it society itself, be it other elements of education. We can continue to see ways in which it plays out. But ultimately, the ways in which it really hits home for so many people and stands out in history, unfortunately, are these acts of domestic terrorism. If it be the lynchings of the 1800s before that, or even through the 20th century, if we talk about racialized violence in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, when it comes to Black Wall Street, when we're talking about ways in which violence was used to stifle people having political voice, ways in which racialized and racist white supremacist violence was used to stop economic progress, to stop the building of community. And that violence was used in many cases directly against Black individuals and Black communities, but certainly not limited to that. There are plenty of stories of what has been done to our Native American brothers and sisters, our Latinx brothers and sisters, when we talk about folks who make up our Asian and Pacific Islander communities, all these different stories of ways in which white supremacy has been upheld and the progress of these communities many times, that has been attacked through racist domestic terrorism. So we continue to grapple with some of the vestiges of the past, as we see, unfortunately, people aiming to take action now in these negative ways to try to scare people, to try to make people not want to move the ball forward. So we're really here in the aftermath of what happened over the weekend with the shooting at the Tops supermarket in the Buffalo area. All reports are showing us that the assailant was a white man who really had made it clear the hate that he had for Black people, for the Black community, on the rifle that was used in shooting so many innocent, people who had no idea what they were stepping into and going grocery shopping. He had racial epithets. He had reference to reparations for Black folks. There were lots of different elements of this that really, aims to really be disconcerting and put folks in a state of being scared, of being afraid, of looking over shoulders. Far too often, particularly in our modern context, we end up talking about ways in which we have to think about doing something while Black. Is it going to be a threat to be driving while Black? Is there a threat to be jogging while Black? Is there a threat to being Tamir Rice playing in a park while Black? Now we add to that sickening list of ways in which Black people have come under attack. And as we said, other communities of color have come under attack, but particularly when we talk about the Black experience, grocery shopping while Black, where we had grandmothers in that grocery store. We had a father looking to buy a birthday cake for his toddler son, all kinds of people doing something that we all do. We all have to end up at some sort of store to get something to eat at some point. This is a very common occurrence for us, not only as Americans, but as humans across the world. So that provides us with some context for why we're here, what we're talking about. And I want to turn to my colleagues to provide their thoughts and additional context from the perspectives that they bring, both in who they are as well as the roles that they fill here at DU. And in the nature of this, conversation, I'm going to allow them to introduce who they are in terms of what they do here and a little bit more about themselves. And we've all agreed to call each other by first names because this is a conversation. So I'm going to start, since the way things are working, she's biggest on my screen. I will start with my colleague Stephanie and let her continue to introduce herself and provide some thoughts on why we're here and what we need to really focus on.
Thank you, Chris. Hello to everyone who's joined us today in our campus community and beyond. My name is Stephanie O'Malley, and I serve as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Government Relations and Community Affairs here on the campus. First and foremost, I am a Black woman, and I own that, and I am proud of that. And I walk every day with my Blackness with me, on my shoulders, in my mind, and in my heart. I, as a lot of people across this country, millions of Black people are emotionally traumatized again, based on what happened in Buffalo, New York this past weekend. I do want to step back because I think it's important and specifically name the victims who were a part of this atrocity of our nation and our country. Roberta Drury, age 32, Marcus Morrison, age 52, Aaron Salter, age 55, Geraldine Talley, age 62, Celestine Cheney, age 65, Hayward Patterson, age 67, Catherine Macy, age 72, Pearl Young, age 77, and Ruth Whitfield, age 86. Going to the grocery store, a task that we all engage in on a daily basis, doing things for themselves and for their families, trying to live their lives in a positive and blessed way. But no, taken out of this world by an atrocity, by someone who's very evil, who committed a horrific criminal act for no reason other than what he self-describes as to replace Black folks in this country. I find that to be an atrocity. I try to find the good in everybody. I try to find the good in everything. And I can tell you over the past weekend, it's been very difficult for me personally to try to find the good in a lot of things because of this horrific act once again in our country. I often watch the news as part of my job to keep up what is going on with government affairs across our country and here locally. I was traumatized when I watched a Black male reporter from CNN, Victor Blackwell, break down on camera during his job, being emotional about what happened in Buffalo again. He asked the question, and I'm going to ask it to this audience. Is this the way we are supposed to live? Have we resigned this to the way that this is going to be and we're going to be? I hope not. I truly, truly hope not. But the question is, how do we continue? How do we continue in the face of evil, in the face of pure, just what I would call vitriolic nastiness against Black people and other indigenous communities across this country? How do we continue to get people to understand that we belong here, that we're space in this country, in this world, and that we are not and shouldn't be the targets of ugliness on a daily basis? We should be able to go on about our business and not be concerned and looking over our shoulders. We should be able to go to the grocery store. We should be able to go to the bank. We should be able to go to the gas station. We should be able to jog. We should be able to go to church. These are the things that I think about, and I think that we need to have a great discussion about. But right now, sometimes I just get tired of the talk. You know, I get tired of the cycle. These things happen over and over again. 201 mass shootings thus far this year in this country. 201. They're in the news cycle 3 to 5 days, and then we move on. What is the answer? I don't know, but I'm certainly here to continue to have a discussion about it and to act to make things better.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Chase, we'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I first want to acknowledge I am a white, cis, straight male and truly can never know that experience. And Stephanie, as you were talking, I just appreciate the vulnerability. Chris, you as well. I feel that same anger. I feel defeated. I too, like Stephanie, where I try to see the good in folks. I'm from a small town in Wyoming, grew up in a conservative family, and I try to constantly think about what are different folks' experiences. But this one, as you were listing the names, Stephanie, it hits hard, seeing the range of folks, what they were doing. And for me, being a part of the University of Denver community, I echo what Stephanie is saying of, we were having these same conversations when George Floyd was murdered and Breonna Taylor was murdered, you know, over these time. And I see people settling into, there's a lot going on, there's a lot happening, and I know it can get overwhelming, but I don't want to keep having these conversations because I don't want these things to happen. And we have to acknowledge that they are happening. And as a white man, I've been really kind of trying to think through and process what it means to be a white man in this country, the violence that white men often show. So many of these attacks and shootings and acts of terrorism are from white men. And there has to be something around action, around justice, around calling one another out, calling into conversation, and unlearning of so much that we were taught. And that's what I've been really wrestling with, is that that piece, kind of not really liking what I identify with as a white man, but also understanding that that's who I am. That's how I show up in this world. And that's what I have to really think through and use that power and privilege to try to undo these systems of power and privilege and violence. And so that's where I've been at. It's been overwhelming thinking of my son a year-old going into a store and being murdered just for purely being who he is. I was walking to the store the other morning, and it was exactly what I know terrorists really want. Was there was a family of Black folks were walking in front of me, and I was like, I can't imagine walking into the store right now having this feeling that you might be harmed just because of your race or ethnicity or whoever you are. And that just it really struck me, and it's been something that I've been battling with, and thinking about how our community can show up and take action. That's really top of mind for me. Is, like Stephanie said, talk balanced with processing, balanced with now let's take action and actually do something. And white folks, it's time for us to show up and take action. We've got to take the burden. But that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Chase. Mary?
Sure. So I'm Mary Clark. I'm provost. I'm, as provost, the chief academic officer, and I'll share in a moment what I'm thinking about in terms of what we can and should do here at DU. But first, I want to pause and say when I learned about this shooting in Buffalo, I reacted as a parent and as an educator. And as a parent, which is my principal identity, just what is it that our children, including grown children, are seeing and learning, and then as an educator, likewise, what are our students seeing and learning? Stephanie's sharing of the names and identities of those who were killed underscores for me the finality of life and of death, and what loss there is that is immeasurable. In terms of action steps, again, as chief academic officer, I want to continue to lead into what is my overarching goal, and that is the thriving of our community, the thriving of all members of our community, students, staff, and faculty. We all spend so much time here at the University of Denver, whatever our role is, that this becomes our home, and I want all community members to thrive in our home, feel like it is at base a safe space, but beyond that, a place where they can realize their dreams and goals and aspirations, where all individuals are valued and recognized, respected, and celebrated. So that's the overarching. In furtherance of that, focused on faculty recruitment and faculty experience and retention, likewise student experience and retention, and then the curriculum. What is it that we teach in all of our different schools and colleges? What should we be teaching? So I'll pause there, and I'll look forward to further conversation, but thank you for including me in this program.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to each of the colleagues who were able to share here. We're going to move into a space where I'm going to pose a few questions, and we'll see what time we have to make it through those questions, but really to dig a little bit deeper than where we've already been. And remember, as we talk about this, we're really kind of representing the space that we hold in terms of us as individuals. When we're making these statements, we'll try our very best not to make broad statements for everyone, but definitely bring our perspectives. So the first thing that I'll pose out there is, let's begin with an inventory of thoughts and emotions that you personally experienced, or what you've witnessed other people experiencing in the wake of these events. And each of you have kind of gone into this, but just a little bit more on either What have you felt a thought of late, or what are you hearing from other folks in your circle, friends, family, colleagues? And I'll actually start off with just a few thoughts in this area, because last night we had a beautiful gathering of people who are, Black at the University of Denver, faculty, staff, administrators, students, community partners, alumni. We had the Black Community Initiatives Gala at the Denver Art Museum. And it was an amazing experience. It was a moment where many of us, we navigate spaces where we may be one or one of very few Black folks, people who have shared experiences, shared navigation of space in our day to day, but we were able to all be together last night. But one of the things that we had to really work on in the wake of Buffalo was we had to really do a lot of double checking with security, and we had to make sure everybody felt comfortable. We had to make sure that there was a certain level of recognition of the space that we were in because of the copycat nature of incidents in the United States, as well as the fact that when we take a look at what happened in Buffalo, the shooter drove hundreds of miles to find a place that was majority Black, a space that probably many folks felt like it's a Saturday. I've spent my week probably feeling minoritized in many spaces of work and everything else, but now I'm in the neighborhood that, for a wide variety of reasons, is majority Black. And you're in this, just a space where there's going to be a majority of Black people, yet that wasn't safe. And I grew up in a very much majority Black community in Baltimore. And that was something that I would feel on weekends when I get to the end of the week where I was the one Black person, and now the weekend's here and I'm around people who look like me, and you have this certain level of support. And like I said, there's a whole nother dynamic for another conversation for another day. But for that kind of that sacredness of that space to be violated, it makes us think of any of the spaces that we have. And it really makes us think of the ways in which, as Mary said, I'm a parent. I'm raising 2 young Black boys, hopefully to be successful Black men in America. But I have to take the time to figure out, when am I going to take away some of their innocence? When am I going to remind them to not be as trusting as maybe some of their white counterparts may be, because they're about to face a cruel world. They're about to be Black boys getting older and older in the United States, and there are all these threats and there are all these things they have to navigate. And I would hope that in the space where we have control in this university, we can try to say, well, where are our barriers? And where can we make things better? Because we don't want people to have to navigate all of these things external. Then we encourage them to come here and continue to have to navigate these challenges and these obstacles here. So, I would say those are the things that are on my mind, and the things that people have told me is that, hey, let's see how soon before they start justifying the shooter and holding them up and saying, oh, he had problems, or, I've heard that, as I said earlier, oh, he had a Hispanic friend who had a Black girlfriend, or, or we'll hear about, was he bullied? Was he this? Was he that? Also, they'll try to make it seem like he's a child. Oh, well, he's 18, he's a child. But then every time we have actual children who are victims, who might happen to be Black or they might happen to be Latino, now a lot of times they're portrayed as older in space. So taking a look at that aftermath, because a lot of times that's where even more of the pain comes in with these tragedies, is the way that it's covered. And lastly, people in my family, in my close circle, they've reminded me, and I've reminded them, let's pay attention to our white colleagues, our white friends, our white leaders, to see, sit back for a moment and see what they do. Because at the end of the day, dismantling white supremacy and really attacking anti-Black racism, anti-Blackness, all of those things, racism as a whole in the United States, is not the job of the Black community or any other community of color. The main work is with our white counterparts. So those are the things that have been circling around both in my head and with people talking to me. And we finished with Mary, so I think I'll loop back to Mary and we can kind of go backwards on this. So Mary, where's your head at with these things?
Very much along the lines of what you have spoken, that we do see a certain narrative unfold in each of these incidents, that it's a mental health crisis or, other excuses, if you will, the youth of the individual, what have you. and we fail to turn inwards, both individually and collectively, to acknowledge, as you said, the fundamental historic basis upon which the country was built, and the anti-racist work that my colleague Ibram Kendi has, really lifted up in meaningful ways in recent years, is work that we need to do individually and collectively. That individually, I need to interrogate my own choices and belief systems, and likewise to do so as a university, as academic affairs, and then more broadly than that. So I guess that's what raises to the surface for me.
And Mary, I believe there was a question that came in. And
Yep. So I made reference in my opening remarks to all members of the community thriving, faculty, staff, and students. And then I spoke of my principal responsibility around faculty retention and student retention. And the individual rightly highlighted the gap in my remarks, and surely I am, also significantly committed to ensuring that DU is an environment where our staff thrive, feel valued and respected, feel that it is their home. As Chief Budget Officer, I'm seeking to do significant work in that regard. And so, yes, I appreciated their highlighting that gap. So thank you.
And I would chime in there that, both in conversations with you and I, Mary, as well as others, that one of the ways in which we're leaning in from the DEI perspective is to try to have, our intentionality go far beyond retention, to really think about how we can shift the onus to us, as opposed to, and I mean us in terms of us collectively as DU, to say, well, it's not on each individual to figure out a way to stay. It's on us to make ourselves a destination of choice, a place where, as you said, a person can really be their full and authentic self and really thrive, be them a faculty member, a staff member, a student, whomever. And I think that's a big part of the work of DEI in partnership with spaces like yours, as well as other spaces across the university, is that we kind of go that step beyond retention, that we have the hopeful outcome be retention, but having people retained on their own will, being happy to be here, wanting to be here, feeling like they are at their destination of choice. So I think we're all, moving forward in that direction. We all admit we have a lot of work to do, but it's definitely a little bit of nuance that we're all discussing behind the scenes as to how we attack that issue. I'm starting to forget our order, but I believe Chase was next. So Chase, I'll bounce to you.
Yeah, it made me think about this article that I was just reading recently that said, focus on inclusion and belonging, and diversity will follow. And we've got it flipped. We try to check the box for diversity in higher education in the United States, in workplaces, wherever it's at. And then we're like, oh, why don't you feel like you are included and belong here? And that really got me thinking. And that's what, with the Buffalo shooting, it really does make me think of the unique experiences of people on our campus, around the country. And one of the pieces that as I was reading, trying to kind of wrap my head around this, they said, there's so much whataboutisms. And so it's like, well, what about this? Well, what about this thing? What about this shooter? It's almost like playing devil's advocate. And that's where I've been thinking of how we get folks to, one, have some empathy, and two, to think that your experience is not the exact same as someone else's. And when we do take a colorblind approach, as so many folks with critical race theory and others have talked about, we miss the point of all of this, is that folks are going through a different experience, and the Black community in particular is going through a different experience right now and at all times. Like, Chris, when you talk about it, brings a tear to my eye. Like, I will never have to have the conversation with my son about him walking down the street. He identifies as a white male. He will not have to think about those things and those extra levels of burden and layers that you have to put on just a child. I mean, those are things that I encourage my fellow white folks to really think about. Like, not everybody's going through the same thing. And part of that is, like, I loved what Mary said, like, it is a self-interrogation for me. And I'll own that I immediately start thinking about, okay, you've got this young, quote, young 18-year-old white male. What could have been done differently so that this didn't happen? How could he have learned to express emotions in different ways? And I start grappling with these different parts of my identity, being from a predominantly white area and a conservative state, and thinking about all of these different layers. And then I get to that point where I'm also completely furious and sad that this even happened. And so from my point, I think it's critical to do that self-work. I think realizing it's a process, not a mountain peak that you're going to reach. Like, we are going to have those biases, we are going to have these things. And so really focusing on how your initial reaction is, what's going on, is your first reaction to say, well, what about this? Or, well, I went through something hard too. And instead of just saying, I'm with you, I'm here, I'm taking action with the Black community. It's my job to do this. And this is historical, hundreds upon hundreds of years that this has been done, and it's not going to be done overnight. And so that's where I've been thinking about too, is this self-work, and then the systems coming from the office of the provost, working in project management, you know, kind of challenging these systems of, like, what, there are anti-Blackness in these systems. There are systems that are set up to really highlight the norms that white people bring. So there's all these different layers that start coming up for me. And the biggest thing, as I was listening to a podcast, and there's a political scientist that talks about, like, empathy is great. It's wonderful to have tears and it's wonderful to feel. And then they likened it to, but if you saw someone drowning, would you say, oh, that is really hard? Or would you throw them a life preserver? And would you start to take action and say, this is really hard and I'm going to be there as an ally? And so I've really been thinking about that, thinking about ways that I can take action for both being an ally, but also in my own community, particularly with white males, around how we do express emotion, the violence that shows up, why this might be occurring, coming from a mental health counseling background for myself. All of those layers start to show up for me. And it's really helpful for me. And I know there are lots of well-intentioned white folks who say, what can I do to help? Or, like, I'm here, but truly finding the space to process with other white folks, and then lending support, resources, and just saying, no pressure, here's what it is. If you do have Black colleagues, Black friends, recognize that, you know, can you imagine coming into work on Monday trying to get your work done when this is going on? You can't even go to the grocery store anymore. Those are those kind of extra burdens that I've been thinking about. And again, Chris, thank you for sharing about your son. It just puts it into perspective. But that's kind of where I'm at, or grappling with these different parts of my identities and how we show up.
Thank you so much, Chase. Stephanie?
Yeah, thank you, Chase and Mary. You know, what I'm hearing, to answer your question, Chris, is, you know, here we go again. And what I'm hearing is, will it ever stop? What I'm hearing is, they don't care, whoever the they is. What I'm hearing is, had this been such and so and so and so, a Black man doing this to a white community, the response would be very, very different, whatever that means. What I'm hearing is, I don't even want to go outside. What I'm hearing is, what are we coming to? What is the politics of this conversation? What I'm hearing is, do people care? And Chase, people like you care. And Mary, people like you care. I don't dispute, you care. the question for me is how do we manage and deal with the people that don't care? No one can convince me that this perpetrator cared about my race. He doesn't care. Others like him don't care. You know, you don't craft a plan like the one he crafted if you care. And so the question for me is, how do you change the dynamic of getting people, you know, of this ilk to care, or not having them get there in the first place? This perpetrator, something in his space, something in his mind along the way, I don't know what it was or what it is. And it doesn't make a difference to those 10 Black families that lost their loved ones. They're gone and never coming back. But what comes inside a person to make them want to target a race of people simply because of the color of their skin? That's the drill down for me, you know? And then we're going to get the, oh, he's mentally incompetent to face the consequences in a, you know, court of law. That's the vicious cycle that I'm talking about that really disturbs me, because that's just another weapon, you know, of injury to the Black race or to others who have been victimized by crimes like this. There's no resolve other than the hurt, the emotion, the trauma that comes along with it. So as an institution, as a learning institution, I think, you know, DU can stand in the gap and perhaps maybe drill down into some of these type of things. You know, how does a mind like this develop? Why? Where along the way was the turn? I heard yesterday his defense was COVID, that because of the isolation of COVID, he had a lot of time to get on the internet and go and, you know, research these type of supremacy type of actions and activity. And, you know, opportunities to look into things like this, I suppose, as a learning institution, opportunities again to provide spaces like this to talk across difference. I really appreciate that. And I think, you know, DU is really leaning into that, and we'll see more of that along the way, but not being afraid to have vulnerable conversations about these things. Because I'm not so sure about the accountability factor anymore. This person is not going to be held accountable along the way. You know, the system doesn't provide for the kind of outcome that someone like this probably is deserving of. Whatever, you know, from a pure criminal standpoint. So things that our law school can lean into. You know, what is our system in that way preventing, you know, these people, these families to have some closure relative to these things from a legal standpoint, from a social standpoint, from a mental health standpoint, from a psychological standpoint? How can DU lean into these things? I see there's some opportunity there. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I'm going to take a bit of a pivot as we go into our very last bit of commentary. We had a few directions we could go into, but based off of some of the things that Chase said, and particularly on some of the things that Stephanie said, I just want to loop around back to this idea of anti-Blackness or anti-Black racism being something that is really essential to the maintenance and the maintaining and the creation of white supremacy in the United States of America. That's really served as a jumping off point for all the other areas in which racism and hate and oppression and marginalization has taken foot in the United States. When we talk about things that have been done against so many other communities, so much of it was kind of boiled in this pressure cooker of these early stages of the social construction of race in the United States of America. We have a social construction based on racism and white supremacy. And with that, we really think about, you know, what are the ways in which we continue to see the dehumanization or devaluing of Black lives? And then sometimes we'll talk about that, but we don't talk about the ways in which we end up then upholding white life. Stephanie talked about the ways in which this assailant will be handled. And a lot of times we hear conversations about the so many times that Black folks have been killed by law enforcement in the United States on a traffic stop, on a, we talk about, sometimes killed by fellow citizens for jogging, all these different things. Yet we keep seeing these images when you have, as Chase alluded to, a white male attacking Black folks, other communities of color, where then the authorities miraculously in those moments figure out ways to bring those young men in alive. And I think that that's something that kind of sometimes people don't know they're having a conversation about the dehumanization of Black folks and kind of the lifting up beyond of white lives, but that's where that conversation is. And I think we see it also bleed into spaces where we talk about, we try to like act like we're celebrating the resilience of Black people, or we're celebrating the resilience of the Native American community. You go down the list, oh, look at all they faced and how they still rise up. At the end of the day, you're still humans, and it's using a lot of your energy, your emotional energy, just, your essence is being used up on just surviving. But sometimes we try to celebrate that. We'll say things like, Black girl magic, or, whatever we'll say. And that's good to celebrate. But at the same time, a lot of times we're talking about it in the face of adversity. And we don't take enough time to really look at, well, what is the adversity that people are facing and how might we do away with that? So what do you all have to say about that idea of us, through so many different ways of viewing these incidents, having these incidents happen, or the ways that we respond, that we're not really fully regarding the humanity of Black folks, or we're really opening up advantage or for existing in the United States as white, even if we don't know it. And I think we all participate in this. If we're Black, white, if we're of whatever other race or ethnicity, it's just the American way. So just what are your thoughts in that space? Like I said, taking a pivot, but based off what you all were saying. So whoever wants to chime in, I won't call on anybody.
To your point, Chase, I'll refer again to the work of Ibram Kendi and obviously many others who have developed work in this area. But Ibram's account of the history of racist ideas at the foundation of our country is a very compelling narrative. And I think to your point, we have not emerged from that. And so to continue, as I noted before, to continue to interrogate where those racist ideas that are so deeply embedded impact current practice in so many ways, and to excavate, expose, and alter our ideas and our behavior accordingly.
Thank you, Mary. Stephanie or Chase?
Yeah, I'm just trying to grapple with your question, Chris. To Mary's point, our history is what I would refer to as, a big, huge elephant. And, to eat an elephant, my mother always said, you just have to do that one bite at a time to get at, a lot of the multitudes, and I'm talking thousands of issues that plague, this country relative to its treatment of Black people. And so to answer what is it to be done, and, why do we continue to uphold and celebrate, the fact in 2022, there's still spaces where, I'm the only Black person, or Chris is the only Black person, hooray, that to me is just a symptom of a larger problem systemically that one has to be talked about and acknowledged, as has been said here, but also some really, really genuine commitment and efforts and actions to dismantle the environments that have continued to allow these things to persist, you know. Um, and that's hard because in any environment, if people are safe and or they feel threatened, like this perpetrator did by Black people, well, clearly they're not going to raise their hand to dismantle a system that's going to quiet their fear. And so I don't know how to get at that. I really don't. All I know, it needs to be gotten at. Those systems need attention, again, a bite at a time. But the optimism relative to being able to get at these things is waning. For a lot of, every time we have an incident like this, the optimism wanes. We're regressing. Let's admit that. And regressing from what, for me, is the question, because there really hasn't been a lot of progress. As Chris says, we want to, applaud and say, oh, we've come this far. But relatively speaking, no, not a lot of progress. And a lot of things in the last 10 years have been revealed more overtly relative to regression than progression. And so I think the work that needs to be done is to really, again, look at these things that are causing regression of sentiment, of thought, of care, concern, and quite frankly, why people are threatened by my race as Black people. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, I think I show up in a room as a white male, and I've been thinking about some of the work that's been done in terms of an individual level, and I would echo what Stephanie and Mary were saying about a higher education institution, is that I do believe in the power of transformative education experiences. I always talk about, like, I grew up very, very conservative, very, very much like, why are we talking about race? Like, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and do the work. And grew up on a small farm and ranch, and I had to really interrogate and unlearn so much about higher education. And I had dozens of folks of color, particularly Black women, who talked to me and said, this is what's going on. Have you thought about this? And it's really helped me. And the thing about it is, though, is again, that's that invisible workload that lands on particularly women of color, Black women in the academy and beyond. And so from a systems perspective, the area that I always go to is that, are folks of color being listened to as a sounding board, and then are others taking on the work? Or are they asking folks of color to take on the work and be that kind of checkbox? And I think that's where we have to really think through at the University of Denver, in higher education, even across our nation. Those are kind of some specific examples for me. And then the other piece is, I know folks constantly do say, everything is about race. Why does everything have to be about race? Like, can't we just mourn together? But that strips away the entire lived experience of Black folks. And that literally is the epitome of anti-Blackness. And so when folks were to say, like, oh, if a certain religion were killed or something like that, but for some reason when it comes to race, we get so uncomfortable. And we always talked about in my counseling program that fear is a secondary emotion, anger is a secondary emotion, and fear is usually what's underneath. And so that's where those conversations, and I hope that there are fellow white people on this call today that are really listening, that we have to have the tough conversations, and we can't be polite. We can't brush it under the rug. We can't be colorblind. We have to acknowledge that it happens, and that's how we honor it. And so I've been thinking about that. I catch myself doing it all the time in the academy. It's like how I have always functioned in life. Like, I speak up first. I'm the leader. My way of being is the accepted way of being. And I have to take a step back, unlearn, listen. And I've had so many folks, Akila at Bank Street, Undoing Racism workshops, who have talked about this. And there is a balance and there's an approach to do it, but it starts with listening, and it starts with thinking, how do I kind of bear this burden and take this on there as well? So it's not that, oh, how can I help? It's more like, no, I'm going to help in these ways. I'm going to jump in. Is that okay with you? And really show up in those spaces. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about in terms of the systems and the structures that are set up. But it took, over 400 years to get where we're at, and it's going to take probably over 400 years to get back. And so that's hard to have optimism, but it starts with, like, Stephanie, that's a perfect way to say it, like, one bite at a time. That's what we have to do. But it starts with white people taking on that burden too. Can't just happen when we have stuff like this happen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chase. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Stephanie. I will say that I don't think any of us should expect things to move, super fast, being that we're talking about generations in, but I would push back. I hope it doesn't take a whole 400 years. Hopefully hopefully we can move this ball a little
Absolutely.
bit on in the other direction. So we're coming to the end of our time. As I said, I want to thank everyone who's been involved, everybody who is online. And, I just want us to think about the fact that too many Black heroes are heroes because of what they had to do to struggle against oppression. Think about if they didn't have to struggle against oppression, where those talents could have been put. And take that and think about the talent of somebody like a Dr. King, a John Lewis, a Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Ida B. Wells, Mary McLeod Bethune, all these different people who, even if they had other areas in which they were focused, they had to put so much energy into struggle. Now think about the Black people in your space of orbit. The fact that they still have to engage in this collective struggle, they have to engage in a daily struggle. Notorious B.I.G. had a song, Everyday Struggle. It's the whole idea of this everyday struggle just to maintain. And a lot of times we do a good job of putting on a good face, but think about where that energy could be if it wasn't focused on fighting white supremacy, if it wasn't focused on being seen, if it wasn't focused on simply being able to exist in your full humanity. So there was a question about what are we doing, at DU? What can we do? And, you'll continue to see more information as to what we're doing coming from the Division of DEI perspective, and really taking what had been more of a temporary or trial engagement of the past coming out of the DEI action plan for Black community initiatives, and really rolling that into a much more solid structure where we're able to coordinate across the university for support for our students, faculty, and staff. So you'll continue to see ways in which we're really making that part of the fabric of DU. So you'll see more as we move forward in that space. We also, in addition to focusing our efforts on the support and uplift of our Black community, also engaging in spaces like this to continue to support both scholarship as well as discussion as a community on really owning up to the realities that we see in our society as a whole, things that we see in the higher ed sector, and things that we see and have to navigate right here at DU. So I really see it as a both and approach, and it's not simply coming out of DEI. It's something that's coming from all different corners of the university, coming from the chancellor's office, the provost's office, the various schools and colleges, student affairs, all these different spaces across the university. And I also—
Chris, if I might, with that in mind, I'd love to lean in on faculty recruitment and retention. That is something I'm ultimately responsible for, as well as staff and student. And on the curricular side, just 2 quick points. We have introduced critical race and ethnic studies as a major. There has been conversation about Black studies that I wanted to share, and just wanted to interject a couple points in terms of work that we're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. So as you can see, we continue to lean in, and we all recognize that we are far from the finish line. We have so much work to do, and a lot of it is introductory work there, but we continue to build. And I also say that we'll continue to encourage individuals, both in leadership, students, faculty, staff, whomever's involved with DU, encourage people to really interrogate their spheres of influence in the ways in which they can navigate, learn within their own space, and really work well as individuals. Because this is really a both and thing that we have to work on ourselves as individuals, but we also have to work collectively as an institution. If we do one but not the other, either way around, we're not going to get the progress that we desire. A few things, please, everyone, remember to engage in self-care. Take the time when you need to take it. Really do what you need, what you feel is best for you to navigate these spaces. There's plenty of resources out there to find out what we're doing here, how people can be supported. Things will be getting placed in the chat. There are also things that you'll find on the C+V website, as well as other websites, across the university. For members of our Black community, we'll have some specific space tomorrow. It'll be virtual space because we know we're at the end of this year, but bringing folks together just to be able to be in community. And you can contact our director of our Black community initiatives, our program coordinator for that, Dr. Andriette Jordan Fields, for more information about that. But we'll have some space set aside virtually tomorrow from 11 a.m. To noon for members of our Black community, be it students, faculty, staff, whomever. And please, as we continue to be mindful of these challenges that we face at the university, remember that we are in the midst of Jewish American Heritage Month. We are in the midst of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and that there are definitely strains on those communities, in terms of some of the violence that we saw perpetrated just over this same weekend in California and in Dallas and in some other places against Asian communities. But just remember that as we become more mindful, as we become more engaged, that we need to make sure we're supporting each other across all these areas of identity. So we've come to our time. Remember that we'll have a recording of this engagement available on the C+V website sometime soon. Once again, I want to thank all of our panelists, and most particularly, I want to thank everybody out there who's engaged. Thank you. Take care.